Hey to all of you. So welcome back. I hope you guys had a good weekend. We're in our final week of classes this week. Okay, so I'm going to be all done on the 16th. Is going to be my last day of teaching, and then we're going to begin to review. Now on that 16th, I will give out basically an optional kind of quiz assessment that you can do if you like. If you don't want to do it, then it'll just count as a no mark. But you're going to receive it anyways, and then you can decide on whether or not you want to hand it in. It'll just give you kind of a framework to work for in terms of our last unit as to what I may be asking you about and what kind of questions I might ask you. Okay, so what we're going to do today is we've all done the nervous system, and now we're going to move on to the endocrine system, which is they kind of relate. Okay, they're both forms of communication. Just one's a little bit more specific, the nervous system, compared to the endocrine system. Now, before we start with the endocrine system, I just saw a couple figures that I showed up last year, and I think they're pretty neat. I'm not going to really ask you any questions about these, but it's just kind of interesting to look at. So if we go here to our slideshow, before I get into the endocrine, I just want to show you some PNS stuff. So we have inside our skin several different peripheral nerve fibers that absorb stimulus. Okay, and inside our hand we have more than just one universal one. We have receivers for heat, as you see. We have receivers for pain. Okay, we've got receivers for cold, and we've got receivers for touch. And all of these would be peripheral nervous systems. Okay, so this is going to be all peripheral nerves, and they're going to be sending stimuluses back to our CNS. Okay, all of these things, and they send different signals back there. Okay, so that's why someone who has a genetic disorder may not be able to feel pain. Okay? And if they don't feel pain, it's because they don't have this neuron. They may have this neuron so they can feel heat, and they can feel cold, and they can feel touch, but they can't feel pain. Okay? Pretty kind of a neat kind of overview. So here's kind of a better picture of what our skin really looks like. So here's a hair coming up. Okay? And then here is all of our different receptors. Okay? All these different neurons. So this is a neuron. Okay? And what this is going to do is going to a physical or a heat in this case, it's going to cause an action potential to rise in here. If you feel heat, that action potential will come down here to be sent all the way to the CNS. Okay, the CNS will compute things. If it's getting really hot on your skin right there, the CNS might send a signal back. Okay, now it won't send a signal through these. It will send it to a muscle fiber, which we don't really have here. Okay, and it will basically tell your muscle to move. Okay, so kind of neat, just kind of looking at the skin and seeing all the PNS. Okay, and you can see that there's a little a pain receptor on this hair fiber, so that if you pull out your hair, you're going to feel some pain. Even a receptor for when hair is moving. So if hair is blowing in the wind, you can feel that. Okay, so now let's get on to the endocrine system. Okay, and this is hormonal control of homeostasis. So our last one was about how the nervous system responds to changes, or basically how it adjusts to homeostasis. We're going to get a little bit more in depth about how these systems relate a little bit later. Okay, so endocrine system or hormonal control of homeostasis. So recall, what the nervous system's main purpose is to allow cell-to-cell communication. Okay, that's key. It's cell-to-cell communication. Since cells are doing different purposes in the body, you've got muscle cells, you've got liver cells, you've got neurocells, you've got cardiac cells, and all these different cells need to communicate to each other. Well, when one cell group wants to contact another cell group, or one tissue wants to contact another tissue, or an organ to a tissue, we use the nervous system. Okay, so an example would be like a motor neuron in your brain contacting a muscle cell. Okay, so there you got neurocells and you got muscle cells, and they're communicating with each other. You can look at it as the nervous system is kind of like the phone lines of the body. Now, there's a problem with only using the nervous system to communicate. Okay? And I want you to think about what that problem would be before you skip to the next slide. Now think about it. If humans only communicated through direct one-to-one communication, what would be that problem if we always just communicated one-to-one? Okay. So when a generic message needs to be broadcasted to different cells in the body, the nervous system isn't the best form of communication. Similar to if a tornado was coming to, say, Blenheim or to Sarnia or to Ottawa or to Hamilton or wherever you're living. Okay, so there's a tornado coming. Individual phone calls that the government would make to each person would not be the most efficient way to broadcast this message that a tornado is coming. They're not going to make all these individual phone calls to everybody's house. Okay? A better way would be to release a signal message that gets received by numerous cells. Okay? Similar to how a single TV broadcast can reach a number of people. It'd be a lot better to communicate a tornado is coming by making a TV broadcast or a radio broadcast where you just send it out to everybody. Okay? So the endocrine system is like that, where it is a generic message that gets sent out to everybody. It's a way of communicating one message to a number of different cells via hormones. Now the endocrine system consists of endocrine glands and hormones that they store and are produced. So these are going to be kind of, if we go back to our macromolecules, these are going to be lipids. Okay? They're the hormones that are going to be stored inside vesicles, inside cells. And the cells that produce these and regulate these are the glands, the endocrine glands. So hormones are chemical messengers released into the blood to initiate an effector. So these are going to cause the effector to do something, okay, to bring this thing back to homeostasis, and most likely in a negative feedback system. So although the nervous system can also initiate the effector, the endocrine system, when it initiates effector, generally has longer lasting effects on the effector. Okay? It's a little bit slower to initiate because you're going to have to release that hormone, and liquids flow a lot slower than, say, action potentials do, so it's slower to initiate. But this is the big thing right here. It affects a broad range of cells. It's going to affect, a number of different cells all at the same time. So let's compare the nervous system and the endocrine system. This would be a very good test question about comparing the two. So we look at the nervous system. Okay, say the body requires all muscle cells to increase the supply of glucose. Say we're doing a fight or flight. Okay, somebody has scared us. Now we need all of our muscles to now increase their supply of glucose so we can perform cellular respiration, create a bunch of ATP so we can get out of there. If the nervous system was the only one that could do this, each muscle cell would need an individual each muscle cell would need to be individually stimulated by a neuron to increase glucose. So you'd have to go to each muscle, into my biceps, and my triceps, and my quads, and my hams, all of them, telling them to increase glucose. This would be tons and tons of action potentials, tons of neurons, and tons of energy in order to create all these. Okay? However, if we want to do the exact same thing with the endocrine system, all we would do is release a chemical into the bloodstream, and when that blood contacts the muscle cells, the chemical messenger would too, and it would tell the muscle cells to increase its glucose. Okay? It's much less complicated than sending hundreds and hundreds of different action potentials down. So when we look at the glands, or the parts that make up the endocrine system, we have a couple of really, really important ones that we're going to talk about here. So we have over 200 unique hormones that control everything from blood sugar to blood pressure to metabolism, even our immune response. Okay? These glands are exclusively for the endocrine system. They don't do anything else. Okay? The pituitary gland, which we're going to talk about, the pineal gland, the thyroid, which is going to be in our neck, our parathyroid, which is just underneath there. So there's our thyroid, our pineal, and pituitary are inside our head, okay, inside our brain. And then we have our adrenals, and our adrenals are right on top of our kidneys right there. Okay, they look like they're part of the kidneys, but they're not. And these are exclusively used for hormonal control, the endocrine system. Now we have some other parts, but they're not exclusively for the endocrine system. Okay? They're used by the endocrine system, but not exclusively by the endocrine. And that's the hypothalamus, okay, inside our brain, the thymus, okay, which is just below, inside our throat, the pancreas, okay, which is going to be right between our kidneys, our testes, and then our ovaries. Okay? So these ones help in the endocrine, but they're not exclusively for the endocrine. Now, when the endocrine system wants to create a message, okay, it's going to use hormones. So hormones are simply chemical messengers. They're like hormones. They cannot exert their effects on every cell, only cells designated with a hormone target cells. So what I mean by that is if I release a hormone into my bloodstream, not every single cell in my body is going to respond. Only cells that have the proper receptor. Okay? Because each target cell contains a specific receptor protein for the hormone. So if I secrete, say, epinephrine, okay, all of my muscle cells may have the receptor for epinephrine, but cells like for my skin, or cells for my kidney, or cells for, say, my respiratory system, they won't have the receptor for epinephrine, so they won't respond to the message. So although you're releasing a message to every cell, if you don't have the receptor, you're not going to respond to that message. Okay? And that's kind of showing here. So here's the hormone A. You have to have this proper specific receptor in order to be able to respond for it. If over here you don't have that receptor, you're not going to respond to hormone A. So here's kind of a picture of it. You're going to have one cell. So this could be like, say, the pituitary gland or the adrenal gland. Okay? And they're made up of a bunch of cells. They're going to secrete the hormone into the bloodstream. So the hormone travels around, and if there's cells here that don't have the target or the receptor, then they just don't respond to it. But when it gets to these cells right here, they have the proper receptor. The hormone's able to attach to that receptor and then initiate a response. And these would be like effector cells right here. Okay, so this is the big list I'm going to ask you to do. Now, this is not just for today. This is going to cover everything for endocrine. I know it's quite a bit. So what I'd like you to go through, I'd like you to print this table out, or you can remake it however you like. And these are the different hormones I'd like you to go through. I'd like you to say where these hormones are created and where they act, and then the effect that they have. Okay, what do they do when they release the hormone? Okay, and this is for the anterior pituitary and the posterior pituitary. So this is the pituitary gland. Okay, a major gland in terms of endocrine. We've got our thyroid and then our parathyroid. Okay, so we'll just continue on. I'll have you do that a little bit later. Now we want to talk about the two types of hormones. So we've got steroid or lipid-soluble hormones, and these are the ones that are going to be able to pass right through the plasma membrane. Okay, these are nonpolar, and since our plasma membrane is nonpolar, they can go right through. So steroid hormones, also known as lipid-soluble hormones, are able to pass freely through the cell membrane and bind to receptors inside the cell. These binding can activate genes, such as genes for growth. Some examples are testosterone, estrogen, and cortisol. So when they come through, they don't have to bind to a receptor outside the cell. They pass right through the plasma membrane because they're lipid-soluble. Okay? They can bond to a receptor in here if they need to, and then pass right through the nuclear envelope or the nuclear membrane, and then get right inside there. Okay, so they have no problem passing right through the plasma membrane. They're a little bit faster acting because they can go right through. The other type of hormones that we have are water soluble, and these cannot pass right through the plasma membrane. So these would be like epinephrine, insulin, HGH or human growth hormone, thyroxine. They're water soluble and they can't go directly through the plasma membrane. They're going to have to find a protein receptor on there that they can bind to. So in this case right here, this kind of purple or I guess purple kind of thing. Here's the membrane, or here's the hormone. It can't go right through the plasma membrane, so it's going to bind to a receptor, and then it initiates a response inside. Okay. So usually the water-based hormones never directly enters the cell, but rather binds to a specific receptor on the plasma membrane. This binding leads to a cascade of secondary reactions inside the cell. Okay, notice how this hormone's never actually going to enter the cell. It's just going to cause a bunch of reactions to occur inside the cell. So as a result of this process, the message can be greatly amplified, as the binding to outside receptor can cause a reaction to occur one after the other until the hormone's removed. So because I'm binding outside, okay, and I don't necessarily use this hormone to initiate anything that I'm going to run out of it, I can just have this hormone stuck on this receptor, and then reactions are going to keep occurring and keep occurring and keep occurring inside the cell until I release it. Okay, because I don't actually use the hormone to create the reaction, so I'm not going to run out of it. So it can just kind of stay there and then continuously cause reactions to occur. Okay. So here's an example of a water-based one, epinephrine. So it can't go right through the plasma membrane. It finds its receptor, goes into its receptor, causes a whole bunch of reactions inside. Okay, so who's in the ultimate control of the endocrine system? We're definitely going to need to know this. The ultimate control comes from two spots, the hypothalamus, which is going to be in the brain, and the anterior pituitary, which is also in the brain. And they are under the ultimate control over the endocrine system. And the reason for it is they produce hormones that cause the release of other hormones. Okay? So what I mean by that is the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary are capable of producing regulating hormones. Okay? And regulating hormones are called trophic hormones. And what trophic hormones do are they are used as messengers to another endocrine glands to release hormones. So these spots right here often release hormones that cause the release of other hormones. Okay, I know that's confusing, but that's why we say they're under the ultimate control. It's because they're releasing hormones that cause the release of other hormones. So here's a quick example over here. The hypothalamus is going to release a hormone called CRH. Okay, this CRH is considered a trophic hormone. And why it's considered a trophic hormone is because this hormone is going to act on the anterior pituitary to release another hormone, okay, ACTH. ACTH can then exert its effects on the adrenal glands to release another hormone, cortisol. Right? But this all comes down to the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus is releasing CRH, causing the anterior pituitary release ACTH, which then causes the adrenal glands to produce cortisol. And cortisol would be like our stress hormone. And the cortisol is kind of the end result. It's going to go on to initiate an effector. Okay. Now this would be an example of a negative feedback system because high levels of cortisol, once if there's detects high levels and it's not being used, it will cause a negative feedback to shut down the hypothalamus, to shut down the anterior pituitary, to stop producing these two hormones, and then it will stop causing the release of cortisol. Okay. Here's another example of a negative feedback system talking about how the hypothalamus regulates it. So it could be like the hypothalamus releasing hormone 1. Okay, whatever hormone 1 is, it's not that important. Hormone 1 will go on to the pituitary gland. Okay? The pituitary gland is going to release another hormone. Okay? This is the stimulating hormone. So this is the hormone that's going to act on the effector. Okay? So this hormone goes on to the effector, which is the target gland. Okay? The target gland responds in the way that it has to respond. It's an effector, so it could release more insulin. It could produce glucagon. It does whatever it has to do. Okay? Once the target gland gets everything back under control, it will release a hormone that tells the hypothalamus to stop releasing hormone 1. This is the negative feedback. Okay? Once it gets everything under control, it's going to send a signal back to the hypothalamus or back to the pituitary to stop releasing any more hormone, which is causing the effector to change. Okay, so an example over here using this would be like, say you're super cold. Okay, so you get really, really cold. That's detected by the hypothalamus. That's the stimulus. Okay, so you'd have cold parts in your skin, PNS, sending an action potential to the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus control center computes it, says, okay, I've got to send a message out. I'm going to send a message to the anterior pituitary, okay, via a hormone. The anterior pituitary is then going to send a message to the thyroid using this hormone right here, thyrotropin, which is then going to cause the thyroid to release a different hormone called thyroxine. Thyroxine is going to basically cause your muscles to start creating a little bit more heat. Okay? When everything gets under control, high levels of thyroxine will turn off the anterior pituitary and stop producing any more thyroxine. Okay? Again, a negative feedback system. Okay. So I'd like you to check out these two videos by Bozeman and Anderson for the endocrine system. I'll probably ask you to do some crash course as well. This is from our textbook, but you don't need to use. You can use any textbook that you want or the internet. I'd like you to summarize the interaction between the nervous system and the endocrine, so you can put that in your portfolio. Okay? You're going to complete that handout that's inside this PowerPoint presentation, and then don't worry about the rest of the stuff here. Okay? We're going to learn about hormonal growth and development tomorrow. All right. So that's everything I'd like you to do today. So we have today on endocrine, tomorrow on endocrine, right? Wednesday on excretory, Thursday on excretory, and then we're all done. Okay? We're all done the course. I'm sure a lot of you are going to be very excited about that. And then we just have several days in preparation of our exam. Okay, so there's a couple of you writing a little bit early, but most of us are going to be writing on that 27th. So we have a long period of time to prepare for it, but we're going to need it because we covered a lot of stuff this year. Okay, so if you have any questions or concerns, make sure you email me. And again,